that has the enemies within our gates. Our enemies want us to focus on external threats. In America and Europe, they want us to be concerned about Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran and the various groups that pose a supposed threat to America and Europe outside of our borders. All this while millions of non-European enemies of our folk and civilization continue to sweep over our borders, a dark tsunami that will drown our respective nations and our civilization. At the same time, we must resist immigration with all of our might, with ability and intellect and courage. It makes sense for Europeans to be consistent, fair, and just. Arabia for Arabs, India for Indians, China for Chinese, and yes, our European, America, and Russian homelands for ourselves and our expressions of life that constitute us. That's right. It is our enemies that are truly the evil ones. It's only an evil man who would seek to destroy other people, who would oppose such sensibility and justice, as I've just spoken, who would oppose the rights of European mankind to live. Make it clear that it's our enemies who are the supremacists, the oppressors, the genocidal forces of history. We must, in our own movements, come to agreement with these other lands to stop interfering in their societies and stop supporting their enemies, such as the Zionists. And then we can sit down with their leaders in their countries and agree to return their nationals in Europe and America. For our military power, the military power we have in both Russia and America, is indeed supreme. It's only our will that is suspect. Only our will that is weak. Secondly, we must show that we represent justice and not become caricatures of our enemies' image of us. Our people are a moral people. And the truth is, our people will sacrifice everything, even their own lives, even their own families, to be moral. They must know that we represent what's good for our own people and indeed good principles for all nations and all peoples on the earth. We will not preach here one thing for ourselves and something different for the other peoples of the earth. We seek no empire. We seek no colonialism. We seek only the preservation of our own homelands and the people that make our homelands truly our home. We are not the promoters and the harbingers of hatred. It is those who seek to destroy the very life of our people who are the true masters of hate. 3, we must lessen among our own ranks and our own scholars the ideological conflict that racks, disturbs, and divides us. We who desire the preservation of our race, the very life of our people, must keep only one ideology as the unifying foreground. And that principle is simple. What's good for our people, we support. What's bad for our people, we oppose. What's good for our survival is our ultimate moral standard. It is concrete. It's a concrete goal. And that must motivate us above some abstract principle. Now, we have brethren in this room, brethren that are socialist or libertarian, Democrat or monarchist, communist or capitalist, Orthodox or Catholic or Protestant or even atheist. We can argue with our brothers and sisters as we would a family member on merits of religion or merits of some other sort of attitude or belief. But we are a group. We must be one family, one phalanx, one faith against the enemy arraigned against us. Abstract principle is not the important thing here. The important thing is the concrete survival of our overwhelming principle, the principle of our survival. Now let me share an example of the devastating devotion to abstract principle, an example of how that's destroyed cases of our own freedom and even survival in Europe. As most of the scholars here are keenly aware, Greece and the Balkans suffered under centuries of tyrannical rule from the Ottoman Turks. At the end of the 18th century, the regime forbid publishing of books seeking the national and ethnic freedom of the Greek people and other people in the region repressed and controlled by the brutal Turkish regime. You know, even books of science and mathematics were forbidden publication for the Greek people because they wanted to keep the Greek people down at heel. A handful of Greek patriots began a publishing operation in the neighboring city, Vienna. And it was led by the Greek patriot Phraates Rigas and a couple dozen leading personalities. Now the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Sultan, opposed this and appealed to the Habsburg monarch on the basis of the principle of legitimacy. Now, the principle of legitimacy was the watchword of that Napoleonic era. It was the idea that the crown heads would support each other against democratic and national movements. It is very similar today to the neocon-led globalism and their defense of so-called democratic principles around the world. Too many whites get obsessed with ideological, abstract principles, and sometimes they follow them in complete disregard of concrete reality, to the eternal shame of the Habsburgs. The monarch who challenged on this abstract principle of legitimacy bowed to the Sultan and closed down the Greek press and turned over Rigas and his European compatriots. They were taken to the Ottoman-occupied Belgrade and promptly tortured and murdered. The body of Rigas was thrown into the Sava on June 24, 1798. Luckily, Rigas' last words were preserved and carried down, and I share them with you now. He said, with not even the slightest whimper, without a bowed head, he said, "This is how brave men die. I have sown the seeds, and the time will come when my country will gather the harvest." Abstract debate must be set aside. What matters now is the concrete. We have a guide in the Roman example. Many Democrats gratuitously quote the supposed Roman motto, Vox Populi Suprema. And that's very common. All the Democrats quote it all the time. And that means the voice of the people is the supreme law. But the actual motto of the Roman Empire that dominated the Roman psyche and spirit for hundreds of years actually was this: Salus populi lex suprema est. And that means all power to the health or salvation of the people. That was the original Roman maxim. Although I am an American who reveres our original Constitution, if our alien Congress and states legally passed a constitutional amendment that ordered a policy of the end of our white race, I would not allow endorsement of an abstract principle to keep me from doing my duty. Constitutional law would not keep me from defending my people from a concrete threat. My friends, there's no abstract principle worth the destruction of our people. Our people's welfare must always be the issues. Abstract ideological questions of governmental form or religion must always be second to the well-being of our people. This is especially true in these times when the question of to be or not to be supersedes all other questions and other principles and other considerations. Now, by saying this, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be spiritual. We must be spiritual. We must be religious. We must have a religious feeling in our hearts and our minds and our souls. And I get that religious feeling when I stand on a mountaintop or I look into the sparkling eyes of our children. And when I look into the beauty of our men and women across this great land and across the world. I get that feeling when I think about the courage and the heroism and the sacrifice of our forefathers that shed so much blood and so many tears and so much to give us freedom and prosperity now here at home. Yes, there's religious freedom. There is religious feeling. But ladies and gentlemen, we can't sit and struggle among ourselves on what the one true religious approach has got to be. We have got to begin to clean the Aegean stables and address the problem of our survival. As I alluded earlier, the first task is to remove the enemies of our people who are behind the gates. Clean our Aegean stables. Those who sow defeatism, self-hate, self-doubt, weakness, degeneracy, not to clean our own Aegean stables will condemn us to feel the hooves of our enemies' horses on our own necks. Tell our young not to go volunteer on the foreign fields of war, born for alien insanities, such as in Iraq or Iran or elsewhere around the world. Dedicate your lives and tell them to dedicate their lives to the battle for freedom and survival right here on our own homeland, on our own soil. And 5, we must call forth the passion in our people. In every way, we must celebrate who we are. We must nurture the love of our people. Stop condemning them for their failings. Evoke the latent courage that's in every spiral of DNA, in every cell of every person of our race. We must wash our hands, our hearts, and our minds with love of our people. We must wash ourselves with devotion to them that makes meaningless even the threat of imprisonment and death. We must sow the seeds, as Riga said. That is our task. Wherever we live, by whatever means at our disposal, no sacrifice is too great. No threat to us is too intimidating. No disappointment is too daunting. And we who are awake, and those who are still asleep in the nightmare for our people in the early years of the 20th century, we must fight to make sure that our comrades, our brothers and sisters, awake and claw their way to the dawn. We must help them shake off the shroud of defeatism and despair and know that we, European mankind, shall go from the edge of the abyss to the farthest star. Let every man and woman at the conference here today and on Friday, with the words of Rigas ringing in our hearts and minds, repeat the following. This is how brave men die. I have sown the seeds, and the time will come when my country will gather the harvest. Thank you. Thank you. Of our folk and civilization continue to sweep over our borders, a dark tsunami that will drown our respective nations and our civilization. At the same time, we must resist immigration with all of our might, with ability and intellect and courage. It makes sense for Europeans to be consistent, fair, and just. Arabia for Arabs. India, who would oppose such sensibility and justice, as I've just spoken, who would oppose the rights of European mankind to live. Make it clear that it's our enemies who are the supremacists, the oppressors, the genocidal forces of history. We must, in our own movements, come to agreement for Indians, China for Chinese, and yes, our European, American, and Russian homelands for ourselves and our expressions of life that constitute us.
That's right.
It is our enemies that are truly the evil ones. It's only an evil man who would seek to destroy other people with these other lands, to stop interfering in their societies and stop supporting their enemies, such as the Zionists. And then we can sit down with their leaders in their countries and agree to return their nationals in Europe and America. For our military power, the military power we have in both Russia and America, that has the enemies within our gates. Our enemies want us to focus on external threats. In America and Europe, they want us to be concerned about Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran and the various groups that pose a supposed threat to America and Europe outside of our borders. All this while millions of non-European enemies